As always, it is super excited to be back for Wisdom. Again, it's Tuesday, every single Tuesday. I think we had 2 or 3 maybe exceptions. Last week was one of them, the Q&A was one of them, and then the technical error that we had when I was on holiday in March. Everyone keeps reminding me about that. That was one of them. But other than that, 5:30 every single Tuesday. We've got this cool series called Wisdom. It's running for 31 weeks. We are already at week number 25. And the series about wisdom is to bring wisdom to the entrepreneur in the business place. So this is for the entrepreneur, for the manager, for the business enthusiast, for someone that's working in sales, team management. Whoever you are at the right place. We believe that every entrepreneur has got a massive calling in their life to create, a calling to supply, a calling to be there, and we want to anoint and speaking to that calling. So this is 30 minutes tops. We won't go over, sometimes we're sooner, but 6 a.m. at the latest, say goodbye. If you were wondering where you can get more of the series, or maybe you don't have time to watch it live this morning, over on our YouTube channel. It's called Not Yet Mature. It's also up on Spotify, Apple, and we've got various series, various things talking cool tech, AI, new product builds, obviously wisdom, off the cuff are some of our key segments that we do there. It's for the entrepreneur. So just go check that out. You can just follow along on the journey here by liking and sharing. It's, thank you so much for everyone this morning. And let's jump straight into this morning's wisdom series for the entrepreneur. We're going to look at conflict resolution and difficult conversations this morning. And I want to start off by talking about the moment before the breach. Right? There's always that actual moment. Most of what gets taught about conflict in business is aimed at the wrong moment. Whole seminars on how to argue fairly, frameworks for the meeting where it finally blows up, templates for the apology email you sent the morning after, all of it arriving after the actual decision that has actually already been made. And the decision was almost never made in the argument itself. It was made weeks earlier in silence by nobody saying anything at all. The real skill was never the fight. It was the 90 seconds before it. Solomon knew exactly where the leverage was, and he wrote it into a single line that most people read as a proverb about avoiding trouble, when it's actually I would say, engineering diagram. And we pick this up in Proverbs 17 verse 14. It says, a quarrel is like breaching a dam. Drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. With that image itself for a second, because it's more precise than it first sounds. A dam doesn't fail the moment the pressure arrives. Pressure is always there. It's there the whole time. That's the entire point of a dam. It's built to hold pressure indefinitely. A dam fails at the crack, a hairline, almost invisible fracture that does absolutely nothing for a long time. And then, past a certain point, does everything at once. Once the water finds a crack and starts moving through it, the crack doesn't stay a crack, right? The water itself widens it, moments take over, momentum take over, and there is no dam engineer, and I don't mean that in a condescending way like dam engineer, like there's no dam engineer alive who will tell you the smart moment to intervene is once the wall's already coming apart. The entire discipline of a dam maintenance is finding the hairline crack while it's still small enough to patch with your hand. That's the whole proverb. Not avoid conflict, drop the matter before the dispute breaks out, while it's still a hairline. While a sentence could still fix it before the water finds it and does the rest of the work for you. Here's where most of us get the diagnosis wrong. We assume there are 2 failure modes that's here and they're opposites, right? The person who explodes and the person who stays quiet. And we assume the quiet one is doing it right. Proverbs doesn't let you off that easily. Proverbs 15 verse 18 reads as follows. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. Read that when you have your Bible open with me. Just that second line again. right? Slowly, because it's doing more work than it looks like. Patient isn't passive. The one who calms a quarrel is still in the room, still speaking, still engaged with the actual dispute. Patience here is a form of action, not the absence of one. The verse never promises a reward to the person who said nothing. It rewards the person who stayed and brought the temperature down on purpose. So the silent one and the explosive one are not opposites. They're the same failure wearing two different costumes. Both of them are avoiding the one thing that actually works. A direct, early, I would say, unglamorous sentence said on purpose while the crack is still small. The hot-tempered person breaches the dam on day one, loudly in front of everyone. The quiet one breaches it just as certainly, just slower. 6 months of small pressure, unaddressed, building behind a wall that everyone in the room can see is straining, except the one person who could still patch it with one sentence. I've watched this exact pattern take down a founding team that on paper had everything going for them. 2 co-founders, genuinely gifted, genuinely fond of each other, who quietly disagreed for the better part of the year about who actually had final say on product decisions. Neither one said it out loud. Both assumed the org chart would eventually settle it, or that the other one would notice and back off, or that raising it would look like insecure. So they didn't raise it. They just kept building around the crack, not through it, until one ordinary Tuesday stand-up over something genuinely, I would say, trivial, whose name went on a client-facing slide. One of them finally said what he had actually been sitting there for 11 months. It came out sideways and loud, and it landed on the room like it had come from nowhere. It hadn't come from nowhere. It had come from a hairline crack nobody patched 11 months earlier, when it would have been, one honest, awkward 5-minute conversation. That's what makes this proverb so uncomfortable for people who think of themselves as peaceful. Silence isn't the opposite of a breach. Silence is frequently just a slower breach with better manners. So it's worth being precise about the 3 postures actually available to you, because most people only think there are 2. There's peace faking, the quiet one, smiling through the stand-up, saying all good, through a jaw that's clenched, calling it grace when it's really just cowardice wearing grace's clothes. There's peace breaking, the hot-tempered one, letting the pressure out loud in public, usually at the worst possible moment and about the smallest possible trigger. And then there's the one Proverbs actually commends, which almost nobody names correctly. It's peacemaking, not the absence of confrontation. Confrontation early on purpose, before an audience is even necessary. A private sentence said to the one person who needs to hear it, while it's still small enough that nobody else in the company has to find out it ever existed. I'm not talking about hiding it away, I'm talking about that hairline crack doesn't need to go all the way up. Peacemaking is the only one of the 3 that costs you something up front. That's exactly why it's the one that every single person skips. So if neither staying quiet nor letting it erupt actually counts as handling it, what does real peacemaking look like? Especially in practice, when the facts are genuinely disputed and both sides believe themselves, right? Scripture is one of the sharpest working examples of this in the entire Old Testament. And the strange part is, it isn't found in a moment of gentleness at all. It's found in a threat. We talk about the woman and the sword. That sounds weird, right? 2 women come before Solomon early in his reign with a dispute that has no evidence attached to it at all. They share a house. Both had given birth within 3 days of each other. One baby died in the night, smothered, it seems, by his own mother rolling over in her sleep. And now both women stand in front of the king, claiming the surviving child as their own. No midwife present, no third-party witness, no record, no test, nothing to check the claim against. Just 2 women, 1 living baby, and 2 identical, equally confident, mutually exclusive stories. He's mine. No, he's mine. Right? I think you guys know the story. So freeze that moment for a second and notice the position Solomon is actually in. Every normal tool a judge reaches for is completely absent and missing. He can't cross-examine the facts because there aren't any facts beyond the two competing sentences that's already on the table. Whatever he does next has to work without evidence in a room where both women will hold their position no matter how long he questions them. Because this is the part with, sitting inside. One of them is lying with absolute confidence. So he does something that reads on first pass like a horror. And we pick that up in 1 Kings 3, verse 24, verse 25. It says, "Then the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' So they brought a sword for the king, and then gave an order. 'Cut the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other.'" Now, you already know the story, or you already can see where it's going to, but I want you to live in that moment, to actually just see that although this is bound to be a test, this was seriousness in those days. These are a typical measure. It wasn't just an example to be used, right? So we know he's not actually going to do this. That has to be said plainly, because it's easy to misread the scene as Solomon momentarily losing his mind. He isn't testing the baby's survival. He's testing the two women, building on the spot one single moment designed to make an invisible thing visible. Because the mechanism that's underneath the whole scene, the stated dispute, whose baby is it, is in that room, genuinely unanswerable. But there's a second question hiding directly underneath it that is very much so answerable. If you can find the right pressure to apply, which of these two women loves the child more than she needs to win the argument? Solomon didn't have a way to answer this first question, so he built a doorway straight to the second one. 1 Kings 3 verse 26. "A woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son and said to the king, 'Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him.' But the other said, 'Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two.'" Look at what each woman actually reveals the instant the sword becomes very much real. The real mother stops arguing her case entirely. She surrenders the argument, hands the win to the other woman outright, because winning the argument was never actually what she wanted. She wanted the boy alive, even in someone else's arms. The other woman, watching her own claim about the collapse, chooses the sword. Divide him. Let neither of us have him. That single sentence lets you, it tells you everything the missing evidence couldn't. This was never about the child for her. It was about not losing. That's a part of the story that has almost nothing to do with courtrooms and everything to do with the meeting you're avoiding this week. Nearly every hard conversation sitting unresolved in your business, especially right now, has exactly this shape. The stated dispute. Who's right about the roadmap? Who deserves the credit? Whose fault the missed deadline actually was, is very often, honestly, it's unanswerable by the evidence in the room, because both people are describing something that's locally true from where they are standing. What's sitting underneath the stated dispute is usually the answerable question. And it's really about the facts at all. It's about whether someone feels replaceable, whether they feel seen for work nobody's mentioned out loud in months, whether an old decision made without them in the room is still quietly costing them something. Most leaders spend their energy trying to adjudicate the surface dispute and then can't understand why the relationship stays fractured even after they've technically, I would say, won it, right? I've sat with a founder whose operations lead had for months been fighting her on nearly every process decision, documentation standards, approval chains, tooling, all of it contested, all of it exhausting, all of it framed as being about efficiency. It wasn't about efficiency. Once the founder finally asked the sword question instead of the surface one, why do you keep pushing back on processes, but something much closer to what do you feel like you're losing here? It came out in, I would say, about 90 seconds. The ops lead had built her entire professional identity over a previous 15-year career on being the person who created order out of chaos. In this new company, decisions were happening fast, informally, in Slack threads she wasn't always in, and every one of those decisions felt like a small, cumulative message that her actual expertise no longer mattered here. The process fights were never about process. They were the sword. And once the real thing was visible, it took one real conversation to solve what 6 months of process negotiations hadn't even touched. Solomon's method wasn't cruelty dressed up as wisdom. It was precision. It didn't out-argue anyone in that room. He built one clean, uncomfortable question and let it do the work courtroom of testimony couldn't have done. And that's the transferable part. Not the thread itself, but the discipline underneath it. Find the question that gets past the position someone is actually defending, down to the thing that they're actually protecting. It works the same way at a table with more than 2 people, which is most of the conflicts that you are actually managing on a day-to-day basis. And maybe you're driving this morning on your way to this uncomfortable team meeting or sitting with something in here. This is that sign that everyone's saying to go and resolve this. A team split over a strategic direction is rarely underneath a genuine disagreement about the market. Usually somebody in that room feels their earlier warning was ignored, and this is the receipt. A client who's suddenly gone cold on a project rarely stopped believing in the work. More often, somewhere in month 2, they stopped feeling informed and silence became their version of the sword. The sword question isn't a script that you recite, right? It's a discipline. Before you defend your position again, stop and ask what the other side would actually be losing if they let you win. Every often, the honest answer has almost nothing to do with the agenda or the item on the table. And I hope that is just take that in for a moment as we just bring this to a point. Here's what's easy to miss about that entire courtroom scene. Solomon's brilliance didn't start with the sword. It started earlier than that, with something far less dramatic. He let both women finish their whole story before he did anything at all. Proverbs 18 verse 13. Answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Most of us skip that step entirely, especially the moment a conversation starts to feel like a conflict. We hear the first 30 seconds of someone's position, recognize the shape of an argument we've had before, and start composing our response while their mouth is still moving. Solomon had every reason to rush. 2 furious women, a packed royal court, real political pressure to look decisive, and he still let the whole account land, both versions, before he moved a single piece on the board. Folly and shame is a strong pairing of words for something as ordinary as interrupting. It's strong on purpose. The verse is naming what actually happens the moment you answer before you've listened. You're no longer responding to what's true. You're responding to what you assumed was coming. Once you've actually listened, once a real thing under the surface dispute is visible, there's still the question of how you say the hard sentence back to someone. And here, Proverbs hand you an image that shouldn't work but actually does. Proverbs 20:15. Through patience, a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. Look at that second half again slowly, because on the surface it's a contradiction. Gentle doesn't break bones, force breaks bones. Pressure, weight, something hard hitting something hard. And yet here's gentle doing exactly that to something as unyielding as bone. The writer isn't confused about the physics. He's telling you something sharper than physics. The kind of pressure that actually moves an entrenched position is rarely the loud kind. Shouting doesn't break anything except the room. It hardens whatever it hits. The way bone under sudden force shatters into more resistance, not less. What breaks a bone in this image is patient, precise, sustained pressure applied without noise, exactly where it needs to go. And that's what Solomon did with one calm sentence and a sword that he never intended to use. No raised voice in the entire scene, just precision applied at the exact point where the truth was hiding. There's a New Testament line that names the sequence Solomon actually modeled in the plainest order possible, centuries before anyone wrote a leadership playbook about it. And that's in James 1 verse 19. He says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. We know that. Order isn't there by accident. Listen first, fully without composing your answer underneath someone else's sentence. Speak second, and slowly, meaning deliberately, meaning the gentle tongue kind of pressure rather than the shattering kind. And anger last, if at all, and slow enough by the time it might arrive, you've already listened and already spoken the true thing, and there's usually far less left to be angry about than there was 90 seconds earlier. One more trap worth naming plainly because it catches conscientious people more than anyone else. Hinting is not the same as speaking. A lot of leaders genuinely believe they've had the hard conversation because they alluded to it. A comment in passing, a slightly cooler tone in a review, an email with just a little more edge than usual, and then they wait for the other person to read between the lines and self-correct. That isn't the gentle tongue Proverbs is describing. Okay, that's the sword left in its sheath, waved around in the general direction of a problem, never actually drawn. A hint asks the other person to do the brave part for you. A gentle, precise sentence, said plainly, said kindly, said once to their face, does the brave part yourself. Put plainly for the conversation you're actually avoiding this week. The dam doesn't get saved by better arguing. It gets saved earlier than that by naming the small thing while it's still small. This month, not the accumulated version of it 6 months from now when it stopped being the issue and become the whole relationship. It gets saved by asking the sword question instead of, say, relitigating it, the surface one. Not who's right, but what does this person feel like they stand to lose here? And it gets saved by a gentle tongue willing to actually say the real sentence precisely without shouting and without hinting, because a hint never broke a bone and never did silence. Think about the crack you already know about. Not a hypothetical one, and an actual conversation you've been quietly not having. With a co-founder, a client, a team member, maybe someone at home, where you've told yourself it isn't a big deal yet, or that it resolve itself, or that raising it will make things worse than better. It's worth being honest about what that instinct actually is. It is very, very rarely wisdom. It's usually just a dam still holding for now. Every founder who's ever stood in the wreckage of a breached relationship, a co-founder split, a client who left without warning, a team that quietly stopped trusting its leader, says some version of the same sentence afterward. I knew for months, yet I didn't say anything. The cost of the conversation you're avoiding is never actually zero. It's deferred and it's collecting, and it's always, without exception, smaller now than it will be once the water finds the crack on its own. So don't wait for the wall to fail first. Go and stand at that hairline crack while it's still small enough to reach with one hand, and have this sentence, that hard sentence, have that today. Thank you so much for joining Wisdom. Have a blessed week, and remember, all of our content up on YouTube, not yet mature. Just follow us on our socials. Thank you. Have a good one.